Well, welcome everyone to our London Council's Climate Programme Showcase. It's one of the concluding events for London Climate Action Week. We've had a really busy and positive week. We've seen obviously announcements from the Mayor of London. We saw the Climate Committee report yesterday about the crucial role that local government has in getting us to net zero and how much further we've got to go. I think we can be really proud though of the work that we've been leading in London. I'm Phil Glanville, the Mayor of Hackney, but I'm also Chair of Transport and Environment Committee, which coordinates from the political side the incredible hard work of so many officers at London Councils, our partnership with the GLA, and obviously London boroughs, which we're here to showcase today. I wanted to just say that I think the last time we came together in this way to showcase the programmes was at the Borough Climate Conference just before COP26. It was a full day of activities, breakouts, some really positive sharing of the energy and progress that we have made together. We have slightly less time today, but we've got about an hour and a half where we're going to go through the 7 thematic programmes and then have a Q&A. The aim is that each presenter will speak for around 5 minutes and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. I will be picking questions out of the chat based on the presentations. So please do put questions in the chat as people are presenting. But my plea is so that I can chair and check through those questions and get some equity between the different thematic programmes is that people don't get into a long conversation and it's just used for questions. In terms of what we're doing today, we're showcasing the work of the 32 London boroughs in the City of London and how they've been collaborating around climate change. I think, the report yesterday referenced, but if we've seen the issue of climate change is more pressing than ever, not helped by the Supreme Court decision yesterday, but we've also seen the real impact on Londoners. And I think the extreme weather events are likely to get worse. We're not far off the anniversary of the flooding last year, but we've also got the challenge of the cost of living crisis and how we retrofit our homes. And consistently in London Council's annual polling, we know that Londoners across the city in all demographic groups are motivated to tackle climate change and want to see action. We also know, though, that the issue of fairness is front and centre and how we bring our local communities and businesses along with us, and that we harness that motivation of all Londoners to act together in a fair and transparent way. So whether we're making homes more energy efficient, changing the food we eat, changing the way we travel, switching from gas to heat pumps, it's not something we can do to communities, we need to do it with communities. And I think that's why we in London Councils, but more broadly as part of core cities and the local government family across the UK, have been advocating for the role of local government, not because we want to hold that power, but we want to work with our communities. 28 London boroughs have declared a climate emergency and they are continuing to work on their climate action plans in detail, and there's a role of London Councils to coordinate all of that. We're already tackling carbon emissions from motor vehicles, we're building local green economies, and we're sourcing and creating sustainable energy across the capital. And I firmly believe that it is absolutely vital that local government is front and centre of this transition to net zero. The investment that we need also needs to be spent in a way that benefits all in our society. That means creating those good quality green jobs that are accessible to all, and also ensuring that as we go through the transition, training is accessible and those that are in sectors that are likely to shrink or be impacted are helped to transition into those new roles. We must also make sure that we target our investment at those that need it most. So I referenced the cost of living crisis, but fuel poverty is obviously very much in our minds despite the warm summer that we're having. It will soon be winter, and we know that Londoners will face real challenges. Before the cost of living crisis, 11.5% of Londoners were in fuel poverty. That is in comparison to England as a whole is 13.2%, but we know that Londoners are starting to see that really hitting the pockets of Londoners, and 18.6% are living in fuel poverty. The situation is only going to get worse, and we must make sure that we hold this conversation as we provide immediate emergency response, but take the long-term decisions that are going to alleviate fuel poverty and ensure just transition as we make that journey to net zero. We need to collaborate across our boroughs, and that is what we're showcasing today. And since we last met, we have won a Municipal Journal Award for our Retrofit London action plan. And big thank you to Enfield and Waltham Forest, but London housing directors and others that supported that work. So we can safely say that our climate programmes are award-winning. They were triggered, if you all recall, by the climate change statement agreed by London councils in 2019. But also supported by the London Environment Directors Network. And as I move to bring in our climate change programme leads, just a reminder that they're all led by one or two boroughs that are responsible for looking at the implementation of the Pan-London Action Plan. But they've always been porous, they've always worked with other boroughs around key activities. So it's not just the work of one or two boroughs on our behalf. And they've been looking out to external stakeholders from London to GLA, TfL, our academic partnerships, and many more. We know that this is an incredibly challenging activity to do beyond the day job, and that is why we've recently agreed further investment from London councils around a programme coordinator, programme manager, and they've just started Hannah, and we are also seeing the maturing of the action plan around retrofit around the single host borough and additional resources and contribution from housing directors. So it's something that we are continuing to invest in, and I know there's lots of support from London Council's leaders. Without further ado, I'm going to move into the short presentations. As I say, they're all about 5 minutes long. I'm going to try and keep them to time, so please don't be offended, presenters, if I say 30 seconds towards the end of each presentation. The first presentation is around Retrofit London, and that is being led hopefully by Dominic Millen from Enfield.
Hi there, morning. I'm afraid Dominic's been waylaid this morning, so you've got me standing in. So hi everyone, I'm James McHugh. I'm Head of Housing Strategy at Waltham Forest. We're one of the co-lead boroughs of the Retrofit London programme. And as Mayor Glanville said in his introduction, we were delighted to have received an MJ Award this past week for the programme, which I think is kind of testament to the successes so far, really. So could I have the next slide, please? So it's a very ambitious programme that we've set off on for Retrofit London, and the kind of agreed strategic ambition is to make all domestic buildings greener and warmer by getting them to an average level of EPC B or equivalent by 2030. The way we'll do that is via a range of measures, including fabric improvements, heat decarbonisation and renewable energy. And I'd just like to stress within that the importance of fabric improvements as a kind of foundation stone for this. And that's got an even more kind of prevalent given the kind of recent rising kind of cost of living crisis and energy bill kind of price escalation. So that's what we need to do. That programme of work will need to apply to approximately 3.8 million homes across London, and it will need to be applied to multiple different property archetypes, so ranging through kind of system-built flats through kind of 19th century masonette blocks. So it's going slightly different applications to different property types. We've also got the added complexity of tenures as well. So we're looking to work across kind of through owner-occupied kind of sectors, through the private rented sector, and also through to the kind of social housing sector as well. And those archetypes and tenures can play out in quite complex patterns across different kind of, even down to individual states and small areas. So it's no small task really. We also at the start of the programme commissioned an organisation called Parity Projects to do a data analysis for us. And on the basis of that data analysis, we estimate that it will cost at least £49 billion to deliver the retrofit measures required to meet that target of average EPC B. That cost calculation was made probably about 18 months ago now. So clearly there's probably only ever going to be kind of an upward kind of escalation of that, particularly in light with recent inflationary pressures. But that just gives you a scale of hopefully of the kind of the ambition of the programme and kind of the scope in terms of its application to different types of properties and the number of properties. Could I have the next slide, please? So I think what we're trying to say here is we've got very strong foundations for the programme. So it's a pan-London programme, and we've been very pleased to receive political support from all London local authorities. So across different parts of political spectrum, and also across different kind of sub-regions throughout London. We've been also very pleased to have very active leadership from the housing directors and very close engagement with our colleagues at the GLA and London councils to help drive this forward. As a result of this collaboration, we've been able to produce an action plan with 19 individual action areas by which we're hoping to take this forward. So those action areas will cover things about, say, the technical measures, so things about insulation and solar PV, but they also relate to some of the kind of enabling mechanisms as well. So look at things like finance and resident engagement and so forth. So we've got quite a comprehensive kind of set of detail that sits underneath the overarching strategy. We also have governance structures in place, and through those governance structures, we've been seeking to engage with a wide range of stakeholders, keep them up to date, and also use them as a sounding board and to bring in best practice as well. So that's been a really encouraging part of the programme to date. Most recently, we've been successful in securing some medium-term funding via London housing directors, and that's enabling us to set up a small delivery team to take this forward. As Mayor Glanville said in the introduction, a lot of this work has been kind of the discretionary effort of officers within the host boroughs, and I think now we're at the point where the kind of scale and the ambition of the programme is such that we need more kind of dedicated resource to really take this forward. So we've got funding in place for that delivery team, and they're currently working to deliver an implementation plan to put this in place, really. So that's the foundations of the programme. Could we have the next slide, please? So I think that there are certainly lots of opportunities for us here, and it certainly seems to me that the whole retrofit agenda and things around energy efficiency are escalating, certainly in the public consciousness, and that you can't really escape from hearing about the cost of living crisis at the minute, and sadly I think we expect that to get worse. So we certainly see retrofit as being a kind of long-term solution to that. I'm conscious I've just got 30 seconds left now, so I'll just pick out a few of these points really. I think one of the opportunities is about the growth in skills and sector capacity. So we talked about the overarching £49 billion cost of the programme, and that will obviously come with opportunities for growth in local skills and jobs really. So I think that's a real positive part of it. I think there's also opportunities around procurement. So how do we collectively, as boroughs and maybe with other social landlords, procure the labour and the materials required to carry out retrofit at scale? And I think also we've got opportunities to share best practice around resident engagement and actually learn about kind of how we take residents with us on this journey, and particularly those who've got vulnerabilities, who stand to probably gain the most from some of the improvements in terms of retrofitting properties and tackling fuel poverty. So I think it's an ambitious programme. It's quite daunting at times, but there's also lots of opportunities within it really. So I think I'll just wrap it up there. The final slide, if we can just flick to that's just got a sorry, could we just move to the last slide, please? Thank you. So that's just got a few contact details and a link to where you can find further information. I believe these slides are going to be shared with the attendees today, so please do take a look at them and get in touch with either myself or Dominic if you've got any questions. I'm hoping to stay around for the Q&A, but there'll certainly be either me or Dominic around later on in the meeting to take any specific questions about the programme. So yeah, thanks for having us along today, and hopefully I've managed to stay to time.
Just a bit over, but thanks a lot, James. That was a lot of detail to get through in 5 minutes. Without further ado, though, I'm going to move on to low carbon development and Natalie Broughton from Hackney.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Natalie Broughton. I'm the Head of Planning and Building Control at Hackney, and I'm delighted to be here today to tell you about our work on the Low Carbon Development Action Plan. So our challenge is to make sure we maximise the opportunities to deliver low carbon buildings across London and showcase what can be done to tackle climate change. So I'm delighted that we have a passionate group of officers from 15 London boroughs, along with other stakeholders, working together with us to shape and deliver this plan. Not quite yet for the next slide. I've got a few things to say on this slide if you could go back. Thank you. So new developments provide the greatest opportunity to inspire communities, and they act as a constant reminder in our communities of how we can tackle climate change and deliver important social, community and economic benefits. So the images on this slide illustrate this. So we've got four sites here, which have been developed with low carbon principles in mind. They include 2 passive house schemes either side of the slide, and an estate regeneration scheme using an existing concrete frame, as well as a fitness centre with engineered timber as the main building material. London needs new development, and taking residential development alone, 50,000 new homes are targeted to be built in London each year. Given the scale of this development, the scale of the development needed, if there is no change, unnecessary carbon emissions will leak into the atmosphere from materials that we use to build, the design of our new buildings and the way in which we heat and cool them, and the way in which we live in our homes and use our buildings. And not only this, if we don't get it right with the new build, the cost of retrofit continues because buildings aren't being built which are not fit for the future. But through this work on the action plan, vital steps are being taken, such as supporting clear and effective low carbon and zero carbon planning policies across London, reducing the performance gap between what is promised through design and what is delivered, and giving local authorities desperately needed skills to meet this challenge. We can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide shows the focus of our action plan. In terms of carbon emissions, we are looking at ways in which planning policy can rebalance achieving targets through on-site delivery over off-site payments. We are calling for stronger carbon emission regulations, particularly through building regulations. We are promoting the objectives of a circular economy. Key way to address low and zero carbon is by adopting reuse and recycling principles. This means avoiding demolition of older buildings where possible and reusing or recycling materials such as steel and aggregates. We're looking at ways to promote renewable energy in new development. So looking at ways in which we can ensure buildings are capable of producing some of their own energy. And then with the passive design principles, we're looking at ways in which we can ensure buildings are designed with both heating and cooling in mind. We're supporting the use of sustainable materials in the knowledge that technological advancements and innovation around materials are essential on this journey to zero carbon. As part of this, we know that reaching working solutions based on reliable evidence around building safety is a crucial step. And then finally, we need to consider energy performance post-development, making buildings more efficient, eliminating the performance gap so that what is built is efficient, as this will be vital in helping save energy and money. We can move on to the next slide, please. So this slide summarises our action plan, which is structured around 4 themes: collaborate, innovate, strengthen and upskill. And it highlights the work that's been undertaken in the programme this year, so shows what we are doing now. Under collaboration, as you can see, we've been working to establish evidence, best practice and appropriate definitions for the programme. As part of this, we've identified where there are gaps in evidence. This includes evidence on viability and sustainable materials. Under innovate, we need to make sure there are common objectives that can be achieved through both planning and building control, and in looking at sustainability and heritage. Under the strengthen heading, we'll be looking to influence emerging legislation, as well as creating a framework that could be used to measure performance. And then finally, under upskill, we'll be focusing on understanding the skills required. So I'd like to conclude with 3 asks for today. So a commitment, number 1, a commitment from all London boroughs that new and existing evidence relating to climate change is open source. Sharing of knowledge and resources is key to meeting our objectives. The second ask is around getting involved. Please do continue to share your ideas, exemplar emerging policy and developments with us. Each borough has something unique to offer, and we're keen for you to share this with us. And finally, tell us your views on the skills needed. What shortages are you experiencing? We know that many boroughs are carrying out their own skills audit, and we'd be really keen to hear your findings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Really powerful stuff there in the asks. I hope everyone heard. We're going to move on to low carbon transport, which is Sarah Ireland from Kingston.
Hi everybody, and thanks for coming. I'm Sarah Ireland, Exec Director of Corporate and Communities at Kingston and the Climate Change Lead, and we're working across the London councils with our colleagues in Westminster as well. You see in front of you our mission, which is to halve road journeys made by petrol and diesel and encourage sustainable and active travel options, which I'm sure we can all buy in. If we could go to the next slide. So why are we doing this? And I think these statistics are pretty chilling. 25% of London's CO2 emissions are from the transport sector. Over a third of our trips are less than 2K, and 37% of trips in London are made by car and motorbike. And as you can see, a chilling statistic about pollution and its impact of 4,000 air quality related deaths in London every year. We will share these slides so you can be able to look at this data further. So what are we going to do about it? If we could go on to the next slide. So we're kind of looking across three areas: avoiding unnecessary travel, shifting to some more sustainable transport, and improving the efficiency of transport. And under those headings, you can see the areas that we're looking at. So what we're going to do about it, we want to create a data framework to track transport emissions, model decarbonisation pathways, and align actions across the borough, across London. We want to explore all the levers around parking road management that support transport decarbonisation. We obviously want to support active travel and electrification and encouraging sustainable choices. And we really want to focus on freight, business travel and transport infrastructure schemes, because these are really, really important to get into that net zero place. But what we do recognise is that boroughs need different balances and different solutions. We know that there are different transport networks and infrastructure that support each borough, and we want to work to make sure we have a range of things that work particularly for local communities and local areas. Go on to the next slide. So what do we want? There's our challenging timeline, which is on the right of the slide there. And we really want to get some final papers and work to the tech committee by the 8th of December. And what our ask is for you to come and join us. The more members, the better, from across London. We really believe we're greatest when we bring some of our parts together and we can really work together. We list out there the areas that we want the workshops around, and we want you to come and work with us on those areas. And I'm sure some of you will have specific things you can add, particularly to some of the areas there. I do realise the elephant in the room is the funding around this, and that we will have challenges, but I don't think that should stop us in our ambition and trying to find a way that we bring our resources together to get the maximum impact. So our big ask is please get involved. There is a contact there in Kingston for you to come and talk to us about, and the more the merrier. And I really welcome everybody's views and opportunities in innovation and creativity in this space. And I will stop to give the Mayor some more time.
Thank you, Sarah. That was 3 powerful minutes and a really clear set of asks. It's not more time for me, it's more time for you, you'll be pleased to know. So we're going to move on to Ashwin Patel from Islington around renewable power for London. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's Ashwin Patel. I'm from Islington Council, so I'm a project and energy projects and programs officer, and I help to coordinate the programme. So our key main ambition, headline ambition for the Renewable Power for London programme is to achieve and secure 100% renewable power for London's public sector now and in the future. And this ambition is broadly split into 3 different work streams. We have a steering board, which is made up of directors, and these 3 work streams are sponsored by 3 work stream leads. So the first work stream is on energy procurement. So that's effectively looking at what can we do collectively as boroughs and other public sector partners to secure 100% renewable power through our buying, and what can we do to collectively achieve economies of scale by collaborating together, and also looking to affect the market by using our purchasing power to drive as much additional new renewable energy generation coming on. So the vision for that is to buy 100% renewable power in collaboration, and our objective to do that is to procure public sector energy for ourselves and our residents that is 100% renewable through collaboration, and also look to kind of achieve the best price collectively. The second work stream is decentralized energy, which is effectively looking at how do we start to move from a centralized energy system with big fossil fuel power systems generating the grid to local decentralized renewable energy generation. So the vision for that is to supply renewable power through innovative energy generation and storage projects, so things like battery storage too. And we want to maximize as much as we can locally, obviously taking into consideration that there are challenges with putting in renewable energy generation within London due to space and planning constrictions and those sorts of things. And then the third work stream is energy advice. So we all know that there's a cost of living crisis. So we want to look to see what we can do to encourage Londoners to reduce their energy consumption where they can. Obviously, we know that's only part of the solution. And how do we encourage Londoners to move their own energy supplies to renewable power? And so our vision to do that is to support Londoners to source 100% renewable power and reduce consumption and save money on their energy bills. And our key objective to do that is to support and influence residents to reduce energy consumption, move to renewables, and save money. And I think the other key thing to say about that is, how do we encourage residents to apply for grants and other larger retrofit measures to reduce energy consumption in the home through that energy advice in London. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of the different action plan activities. So this is a 2-year action plan that we've developed. And then on the energy procurement side, what we want to first do is assess the current procurement position across the capital, and we want to look at that broader than just local authorities by including the broader public sector families such as the NHS. We want to look to establish a position on carbon reporting. So how do we best do that, recognizing that actually not all renewable energy procurement is the same, and there's different varying levels of additionality in terms of providing new generation. And we want to investigate how can we collectively collaborate and what are the routes to market for that, and then effectively want to go about and conduct that exercise. And then the second work stream on decentralized energy, we want to first understand what the picture is of centralized energy projects and what are the pipeline projects that are looking to come in. And then based on understanding better the picture, we want to look to potentially produce a report based on a potential sub-regional model. So where can we identify clusters of boroughs together that could potentially work collaboratively together where it makes sense to do so. And so in that light, we are also supporting the feasibility of development of a North London heat and power network. So that's potentially looking at one large decentralized energy heat and power network in the north of London. And we also want to looking at the Green Skies project in Islington as a case study for London, which is a really holistic decentralized energy project that is looking at taking waste heat from a data center and integrating it with lots of different solutions. And we also want to look at the West London local area energy plan and incorporate that so that we can start to integrate that to the other parts of the programme. And then on energy advice, we want to first understand what the energy advice model is, and before we then kind of take any further actions. on some of the initial findings and learnings that we've had. So on energy procurement, boroughs are spending £250 million in energy. So we know that collectively we have a potential to impact the market, and only one known borough has a power purchase agreement with a renewable energy generator. So we know that there's lots of potential in that space. And then on the decentralised energy work stream, we know that boroughs are really grappling between what they do in the here and now and what they can do strategically moving forward, such as local area energy plans. And so how can we bear that in mind as we move forward through the programme? And then lastly, on energy advice, we know that it's a very complex picture with lots of different actors giving energy advice, from central government, boroughs and charities. So how do we look to coordinate all of those things as best as we can to deliver on the objectives? And I will pass it back to Mayor Glanville. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ashwin. And just to say, there's a lot going on in the chat. If people can just put simple questions, they will come in at the end in the Q&A when we get to that after the presentations. So we've got One World Living now with Matthew, Adams and Harrow. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor Glanville. Very good morning to everybody. I'm Matthew Adams. I'm the Assistant Director at Harrow, leading the climate work. So what's the One World Living programme about? Well, it's a bit different from the ones you've heard so far, in that it deals primarily with consumption emissions. So by that we mean the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions that are embodied in some of the key material goods that we all consume. So whether it's the food we buy from the supermarket, the plastic bottles our toiletries come in, our phones, the computer you're watching this on, the jeans we're wearing, they've all got greenhouse gas emissions associated with them, and they come from the extraction of the raw materials, their production and or their manufacture, their transport to us, the end user, and sometimes that's thousands of miles, of course, and their disposal at end of life as well. And sort of unlike the gas we use in our boilers or the emissions from road transport, these emissions are often out of sight, but ultimately we're responsible for them. They exist because of our collective consumption and the demand that we're creating. So our programme title, One World Living, acknowledges that fundamental truth. We live on a single finite planet with finite natural resources, and collectively we need to find better ways, more circular ways of living that enable us to live within those boundaries. So our programme, as you can see there, focuses on 4 key materials: food, textiles, plastics, and electrical items. And tech has set us this very ambitious target to reduce emissions by 2/3 by 2030. And some of you will be aware the University of Leeds produced really good data last year for all London boroughs. You can get your own data from the London Council's website, showing what the consumption footprint was for average residents across London. And a headline is it's about 8 tonnes of carbon dioxide per year, and that includes the transport and the home use as well. But just to give you a feel for the ambition here, that compares to the 2.5 tonnes a year that the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies estimates that developed cities need to reach by 2030 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So it's a really big ask. There's a lot to be done. We are fortunate in London. This programme is very much a team effort. Harrow are coordinating it, but working very closely with West London Waste Authority, London, who do a lot of work in the circular economy space. And we've got theme leads: Hackney for food, Hammersmith and Fulham for electricals, West London Waste and Wandsworth for textiles, and Richmond for plastics. Next slide, please. So how can we help reduce emissions in these areas as London boroughs? Well, the good news is we've got a model. I think someone famously once said all models are wrong, but some are useful. So hopefully this falls into the latter category. And our model acknowledges that the programme is really about behaviour change and normalising new ways of doing things. It's taken millions of individual consumption actions by citizens, excuse me, all of us going about our daily lives every day to create this high emissions culture that we're in at the moment. And by scaling up millions of different ways of doing things, avoiding single-use plastic, eating more climate-friendly diets, only buying clothes we actually get good use out of, and making our devices last more than a couple of years, together we can make that big change that's needed. So if you just move on the slide one more click, thanks. So what we've tried to do here is just identify in purple those leverage points local authorities have, and starting at the top and working in a clockwise direction, you'll see that we've got a part to play in telling the story of change. Clear political leadership is key to this. the why and the how. And linked to that is the provision of good quality information. And I'll talk about the information sheets the programme has produced to help with that in a moment. We also have a part to play in walking the talk, looking at our approach to single-use plastics as organisations, for example, and using procurement to buy different materials and buy them in different ways for catering, IT and uniform services, for example. And of course, we've got a key role in changing policies as well. There are clear systems barriers that currently stop people doing more, and we need to use our influence. That's all 33 boroughs representing over 9 million Londoners to help remove those barriers. Both things we can do ourselves, so more consistent recycling approaches across London boroughs, but also pushing for upstream change, such as minimum standards for the longevity of electronic goods, or perhaps pressure on supermarkets to move to different forms of packaging that reduce and eventually eliminate single-use plastics. And then, as you see, as we move around to the left-hand side of that diagram, we've got a clear role in implementing policy changes like the Environment Act, which is coming in shortly, helping to normalise those new behaviours and then push to that next level of ambition. Next slide, please. So I won't go through this in detail given the time, but just to illustrate our approach generally, each thematic area has a vision for that material area and key messaging about how it can be accomplished. And broadly, all these reflect thinking about the circular economy. So firstly, we need to move to consuming sustainably produced products in the first place. Secondly, we use them for their maximum value for as long as possible. And then thirdly, we recycle them at end of life to provide the raw materials for the new products. And in this way, we can not only drastically reduce emissions, but will also help to create the space and relieve the stress on the natural world and its ecosystems, so it can begin to recover and help to support us all going forwards. So my last slide, please, if you just move it on. Just to say, the team have worked hard and hot off the press, we've got a useful set, I hope, of resources, information sheets for each of those 4 areas. They're packed full of useful stuff. They've got key facts for each areas. One of my favourite one is there's 183 million of items of outgrown baby clothes sitting in wardrobes at the moment. That's enough for 250 items for each baby born this year in 2022. They also include the vision, the key action areas, the suggesting messaging, and lots of existing initiatives that are already happening across London that you can plug into. We'll ask London Council's colleagues to send these round after the event, and hopefully that's a really practical resource to help build upon all the good work that many of you are already doing. So quick tour de force. Thanks for having me. I'll hand back to Mayor Glanville.
Thanks a lot, Matthew, and really looking forward to seeing the one pages there. The Build Green Economy being led by Hounslow and Wayne Stevenson.
Thank you, Mayor Glanville. My name is Wayne Stevenson. I'm the Director of Environment and also Hounslow's lead and the lead for the green economy, but Hounslow's lead on climate change. Hounslow are delighted to be leading this work stream, working closely with colleagues across boroughs. We recognise the important role that this work stream has in terms of facilitating the delivery across a number of the projects that have already been sort of expressed by colleagues, and particularly sort of thinking about those skills challenges, the funding challenges and investment challenges. They're key. But just picking up on something that Mayor Glanville mentioned in his opening address, it's extremely important that as we take this opportunity to transform our economy both in London and influence the way economies work further afield. It's really important that we understand and make that a just transition for our residents who are really sort of the drivers of our UK economy. And London's economy. And there's some rather stark sort of entrenched inequalities that exist within our current sort of economic system. But equally, with this sort of climate challenge and the challenge that this programme seeks to address, we have sort of a wide number of individuals, and as the stats here show, and there are others, so please do take the opportunity to read the action plan in detail. But some of the stark figures are 39% of London's disabled residents are economically inactive, 38% of people, non-white individuals, are working in carbon-intensive industries, and these individuals are not only at risk right now, but at risk further if we don't get this transition to a green economy right. And so ultimately, what's underpinning all of this action plan around the green economy is that driver to ensure that this is a just transition. Next slide, please. So our overall objective is to double the size of the green economy by 2030 to support all of the transition and development work that will take place in London, and ensure that those opportunities are there for all London residents to benefit from this transition, but also work with industry and others to enable an increase in demand for low carbon technologies and the like. We appreciate this is a very sort of broad subject as well, and this programme is certainly informed by all of the other work streams that are taking place, and in terms of our drivers to influence national policy. But we've attempted to sort of create a definition around that, and that's to actively and directly contribute to or indirectly support the achievement of the UK's net zero ambitions. And ensure that other environmental goals are not left behind while we address those very acute climate risks that have already been highlighted. So to do this, we've structured this programme and worked very closely with colleagues across London and across this across the action plans that you've heard today. And we've developed four work streams, of which the focus will be on green jobs and skills, green economic growth, green enterprise and innovation, green finance and investment. Next slide, please. So some highlights from the action plan. It is a comprehensive action plan, so we haven't listed everything, but in terms of green skills and jobs, it's really important that we provide residents with the upskilling and reskilling opportunities that come, but we need to support businesses and industries to be able to create the roles for those individuals to transition into, and therefore there is a pressing need that if we're to achieve our ambitions by 2030, there is a need to do that rather rapidly. We want to connect council suppliers and council procurement systems, as we've heard from colleagues, so to the jobs and skills market, so that we can leverage the power of London council spend to really sort of foster and facilitate that transition action that will create the jobs and feed that with the skills that are needed to grow the economy. And ultimately, as we've heard from colleagues as well, our ambition is to work very closely with residents and businesses so that they can all come on this journey, but also understand the challenges that exist. It's extremely important as we do this that we foster the innovation. There are many enterprises, new startups, which is fantastic news. And really, councils are in a unique position to be able to support, put in place the structures to be able to support SMEs, these startups, but also support industry to transition to more sustainable futures and utilize the technologies that are there. Picking up on that sort of green finance and investment challenge, we're working pan-London to create an investment model so that we can operate at scale. This is in the early stages of forming, and there is some we're sort of exploring all of the different potential avenues and potential sort of risks so that we can get this absolutely right, and then be able to scale up so that we can create the scale of investment that's needed for that very significant challenge. And we want to unlock sources of funding where it exists, but we recognise also that this can't solely be funded through simple sort of taxation and impressing that upon taxpayers. especially in the context of the cost of living crisis. And ultimately, we intend to grow the green economy, and that's to set the environmental standards and targets such that it really sort of enables businesses to pin their sustainability actions to national policy, but also aim to then for councils to be at the forefront of helping fund and support those businesses to transition. One example.
Sorry to interrupt, Wayne. I've been generous, but you've had a minute more.
My apologies. My apologies, Mayor Glanville. I didn't see the note. Next slide. So progress to date, obviously this action plan is a key point in that. We're establishing our individual themed working groups around this, and we've onboarded a knowledge partner so that we can continue to be abreast of the data and references. Next steps and our asks are we're continuing to monitor all of the data that comes through. We'll work with BEIS, the UK CCIC and colleagues across to work on the full value of this, and our plan is to identify all of the synergies across these action plans and put that into action. I'll stop there, Mayor Glanville.
Brilliant. Thanks, Wayne. And again, really clear next steps and asks there. The final presentation is creating a resilient and green London. It's being led by Southwark Council, but presented by Simon Gilby from London Councils. So over to you, Simon.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor Glanville. Yes, as the Mayor just said, I'm stepping in for London Borough of Southwark. So yes, the background for this programme is there were originally 6 climate change programmes, but as resilience, there was a lack of adaptation was identified across other programmes. It's been brought in, and as we know, with the increased focus on net zero, adaptation and resilience are often left behind. The plan aims to encourage consistency, collaborative working and shared learning. Next slide, please. So why? Well, so as the Mayor actually mentioned at the top, we are in a situation with our climate where even with the best case scenario for mitigation, the situation will only get worse. We're currently at 1.1 degrees of warming. We aim for 1.5 maximum, so we're still looking at another 0.4 degrees. But actually, the reality is that current policies being implemented across the globe put us on course for a warming by the end of this century between 2.5 to 3 degrees. Now, there are a lot of really bad things that are going to happen at 2.5 to 3 degrees, and it's hard to give you, I don't want to give you a shopping list of doom, but I think the highlights there is to really get a grip of how bad it is just simply to say that that level of warming brings the habitability of the tropics very much into question. You would have heat waves of a level that would be unsurvivable. We've seen this year, for example, already horrendous heat wave in India, record heating of 40, 50 degrees on some days. This would become, commonplace across the tropics. That would then lead into drought. It brings onto the table things such as global famine, lots of terrible things. Here in London, of course, we would be impacted by the sorts of things you can see in this slide. Flooding, of course, drought. We would really struggle. That UK temperatures passing 34 to 6 degrees in a row for the first time. This would be extremely common, and it's and even at 1.5 degrees, we are going to see this happen frequently. So this is, we are living through, some of the hottest years on record, but they are actually going to be some of the coolest years that our children will experience, and that this would be an unimaginably clement climate for our grandchildren. So we need to prepare for this. This is coming. So yeah, next slide, please. So the purpose of this plan is to achieve the ambition set out in climate change to create a resilient and green London. And by this, well, what do we mean? We mean that London should be environmentally, socially, and economically resilient to the changing climate in a way that safeguards and enhances green and blue infrastructure and ensures they're equally accessible to all. So we are therefore looking at creating holistic cross-cutting actions and activities to be taken across 5 key areas, including associated benefits and risks. So these main ones are overheating, flooding, water scarcity, pests and diseases, and enhancing natural capital. So Southwark is leading on has led the development of a 2-year priority work plan and has identified the additional powers and resources that would be needed. These are, of course, considerable. We know just simply on the flooding, there's a huge amount of a resource that is required to get London to a reasonable level of risk. And we are currently reviewing activities undertaken at the borough level and identifying external partners needed to support the work of the group. So the action plan has been published. It's sitting on the London Council's website. And of course, Southwark very much welcomes interested parties to get in touch and collaborate with us as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to all of the presenters for their presentations. A huge amount of work being showcased there, and I can see real progress even since we last saw these presentations. And I think there was a reference earlier from Sarah about the work to kind of bring these together so that all of them have action plans by the end of the year and go to London Council's Tech Committee. I've got some questions already from the chat. There's also quite a lot of offers and sharing of what people are doing. There's over 100 of us here, so thank you for everyone that's joined us today, especially at the end of a very busy London Climate Action Week. The chat will be quite difficult to track if people keep sort of a dialogue going. So as I say, if people can put simple questions there, and if they want to direct them to an individual presentation, please do so. I think that the first challenge, certainly from Carol, that I've seen across several of the themes is around funding and capacity. And obviously we've talked a little bit about what we're doing from a London Council's perspective, and I've seen Hannah join the chat as well. Does anyone want to come in on the issue of funding and how we deliver this? There's also a bit about how these, from Carol as well, but also Keith, I think, and James around coordination and how the different programs interact with each other. And I wonder if Katerina wanted to come in on how we're doing the reporting around the climate action plans as well. But if I could see some, I've got on funding and the coordination, I've got Sarah, James and Natalie, and then I'll come back round via Katerina. Sarah.
Hi, I think I kind of alluded to this in my presentation. The issue is, yeah, it is a real funding challenge, but isn't local government a real funding challenge all the time and just about to get even more challenging? So I think there's a number of things. First, I think we shouldn't let us stop it with our ambition. We need to look at what we've got and how we make the most of it. I also think we need to look as councils in ourselves about our priorities, which are really difficult, but whether if this is a top priority, how do we put some of our resources to it? And I know that's challenging. And I also think we need to continue, which London councils do and across the local government family, to continue to pressurise and lobby central government for funding, because actually some of these challenges, and we know that, will only be solved by national and international approach and funding. However, I don't think that should stop us seeking to try our best and to do what we can. So I don't want the funding issue to become something that stops us going forward, because it could overwhelm you, couldn't it?
I think that's brilliantly put, Sarah, and I think we're all really conscious of that. But the fact that we're doing all of this work from local government shows that we're not going to wait for national government or international agreement and funding, but we need to still continue to lobby, as you powerfully said. James.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Glanville. I was going to make some quite similar points to the previous speaker, really. I think certainly from the Retrofit London perspective, the overall cost that we talk about, we're in no way implying that local government's going to bear those costs, or even the majority of those costs. There's going to be a key role for private finance in supporting the retrofit of homes. And I think as well, we're continuing to very constructively engage with central government on funding. And certainly in terms of retrofit, one of the more recent issues isn't so much the availability of the funding, it's also the terms on which the funding has been made available, which has certainly presented challenges for actually how we roll out retrofit. So I think ultimately we're not saying that this is all going to be core funded by local government. There's going to be a mixture of different funding options, and that's certainly something we're exploring in the retrofit programme.
Brilliant, thanks James. Natalie?
And just very quickly to add to that, I think I agree with all that's been said, and certainly funding of the Low Carbon Action Plan programme has been a big challenge for us. What I just wanted to add was that I think there are ways in which we can look creatively about how we fund things like evidence and research. And one of my asks at the end of the presentation was around making sure that existing and new evidence around climate change is open source, and we kind of think about how, you know, if one borough is commissioning a piece of evidence to support planning policy, then it's very likely that that piece of evidence will be useful for everyone. So I think we need to start thinking creatively about how we share that evidence.
Thanks, Natalie. I think that point about open source, it feels to me as well, since we last did this in October, there have been a lot more people joining the lead boroughs to do this work. So I hope coming out of this presentation, whether it's civic society, that's been really active in the chat, or just colleagues thinking, yes, I know someone here that would be really keen to work on one of those themes, that we can get that aggregation again of more people involved. I've got, I think Wayne wanted to come just in on this round. I did just want to pick up the TUC comment in the chat. I co-chair with Deputy Mayor Rodriguez the Green New Deal Expert Advisory Group, and the TUC are represented there. And whenever we talk about skills, jobs, the economy, these thematic programmes, the voice of the TUC is very strongly held there. I do think there's obviously some work to do, perhaps you know, within individual programmes, especially maybe around the economy as well. But Wayne?
Yeah, I'd echo the comments of colleagues. I think there's an important role for all areas of public sector and business and industry to come together. Absolutely pick up on our colleagues' comments about sort of taking a creative approach to this as well. It's absolutely certain that we're not going to be able to do this just through funding. Financing will absolutely be required, but also a blending of the two to come up with those solutions. And we'd certainly, hopefully, will develop a model through our action plan to achieve that and bring that to the fore for colleagues as well as business and others.
Thank you, Wayne. Just London Council's colleagues, there's a lot about measuring impact in the chat, and obviously each theme has an eye on data and impact and how we measure impact around the individual themes. But I think it's the climate action plan work that get to an overall London position around where we are compared to our individual climate emergency and net zero commitments, and obviously the overarching one with the Mayor around 2030. I just wondered if someone could come in on that piece of work and how we measure impact.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in there.
Thanks, Katerina.
Mayor Glanville, thank you very much. So before I talk about that, just briefly, I wanted to also say the work that we're involved in with the UK Cities Climate Investment Commission, which is all about trying to attract more private investor funding into net zero projects. And that is ongoing programme between all of us and core cities, but also all local authorities now in the country. And that is ploughing ahead, and we're making some good progress, particularly with some of the investor communities, and it's really important. But on the climate action plans, as you say, Mayor Glanville, we are sort of holding a trying to keep an up-to-date database on all of the action plans that are being published by all of the London boroughs, and we're keeping an eye on any synergies there, on any collaboration opportunities. And I think all of the answers that's just been given by the panelists have just highlighted how important collaboration is in this space. You know, we will not be able to do this on our own. We will need all of the partners involved. We will need all other public sector partners. We'll need the private sector partners to come along with us. And we're seeing progress along that. You know, many different organizations are coming out saying in favour of the net zero agenda, setting their own ambitious targets and so forth. And I think we need to just capture all of that and in a useful way. And I think the steering groups that have been set up possibly could benefit from a few more private sector partners, but I think we're getting there, which has been really helpful. So I think the climate action plans and the sort of our trying to keep an eye on all of those and keeping it up to date really helps by highlighting all of the same work or similar work that all of the boroughs are really doing, and making sure that we capture on the synergies, capture on where there's overlap, and that, you know, not everybody, and I think somebody mentioned that in the chat as well, so that not everybody procures on their own, for example, but we go out together collaboratively, certainly as boroughs, possibly with other partners as well. So thank you very much for that.
That's really helpful, Katerina. I think Cal's making a really important point about the affordability of transition around domestic heating systems from the perspective of a homeowner. But I know also when we think about the retrofit work, it was referenced at the start by Dominic around different typologies. I think this is one of those areas where we've got a very ambitious target, but a really challenging funding environment. And I do recall back when the energy strategy was announced by government on the eve of COP, we were making some of the points that Carol is making in the chat about how can even private owners do it, never mind what's the answer for other types of heating. I don't know if, Dominic, you wanted to come back in on some of those points about retrofit. The other thing I maybe not have clearly articulated from the questions is the balance between, and maybe this is something that sits across low carbon development, retrofit and resilient and green, between building resilience and adaptation and ensuring that buildings contribute to net zero around green infrastructure. And I could see Natalie nodding. I might bring Natalie back in, and the interaction with the Environment Act around things like biodiversity and some of the new skills we might need. But I don't know if Dominic's still with us on retrofit.
Hi there, Mayor Glanville. It's James from Waltham Forest. I think Dominic's on the call.
Sorry, James.
It's fine. I think Dominic's on the call, but he's not one of the presenters, so probably not able to answer. I think with retrofit, there's clearly a funding gap in terms of individual households and particular measures. And a lot of the public funding schemes have been a little bit piecemeal. So they'll either only be available for short periods of time, or they'll only cover a part of a particular measure. So the funding which I mentioned to Carol in the chat, which is to cross-subsidise the cost of an air source heat pump, that will only provide up to £5,000, really. So there is clearly a funding gap for individual homeowners to make up there. And I think something that we're very aware is particularly at the current times, which are quite financially constrained for a lot of households, is people don't typically have that upfront capital to invest. So one of the things that we're looking at is potentially how there might be access to either low or no interest loan finance provided by any number of bodies to help households cover those long-term costs, really, because with a lot of the retrofit technology, the payback might not kick in for another kind of 10 years in terms of the cost saving for an individual household. So the financing of some of this is quite difficult. And I think there's a bit of debate to be had as well about kind of who benefits from this. So I think the current approach is very much about an individual homeowner and that being their asset, and purchasing an air source heat pump would benefit them as a private individual. But I think sometimes what that conversation is missing is a wider societal benefit, is if we transition kind of 3.8 million homes across London from gas boilers to heat pumps, there's obviously a wider benefit in terms of public health and lowering carbon emissions. I think there's probably, I personally say there's probably a better balance that could be struck between those agendas, but certainly we recognise that there are funding constraints out there, and for a lot of individual householders, even where they've got the willingness, they've not got the financial means to go out there and source this technology, really. So it is something that we're actively looking at, really.
Thanks a lot, James. Really appreciate that. The point, Natalie, did you want to come back? And then I see Sarah's still got a hand up as well. I don't know if she wants to come back as well. Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the points around kind of the urban greening and not featuring in low carbon slides. I think we had some slides previously at a similar event where we had some fabulous buildings with some green walls, and it's a really important part of the programme, but of course also overlaps with green and resilient. So we just need to make sure that we kind of focus on both of them as part of both of those. Focus on it as part of both of those programs, but yeah, absolutely part of low carbon because of issues around urban heating and the need to look at heating and cooling, but also those additional measures around net biodiversity gain is also kind of integral and kind of a dual aim of what we can achieve through looking at green walls and other features within our new buildings. So really important that we, through our programme, showcase those brilliant examples that are starting to emerge. So yeah, it definitely is part of that programme. And the point also, if I may, around the solar panels for construction sites is an interesting one as well, and that's kind of all about looking at embodied carbon and the cost around construction. So not only that, but also looking again at the materials and how those are produced and what energy sources are used to produce things like steel is really important. So yes, very much part on our radar and part of this programme as well as others.
Thanks very much, Natalie. Oliver posted very early on a really good post about collective climate action, which I just wanted to highlight, and a plea from him to sort of get more involved, and clearly that his list of people and ideas, and perhaps we need to get more sort of open approaches about communicating what's happening on a more regular basis. I know some people use things like Medium and week notes and things like that to talk about this sort of work, but there's obviously a whole community out there doing that. Schools have come up several times in the chat, and we did mention skills, and I just wonder, schools themselves obviously need to go on their own net zero journey, and it touches on everything from one world living to transport. But there's also, I think, something in there about climate literacy and communication. I referenced Londoners as the key reason we're doing this at the start. Does anyone have any thoughts about the relationship between sort of skills, education, climate literacy, and the green jobs piece that also Wayne mentioned? Matthew.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, for our programme, the One World Living one, it's a lot about changing cultural attitudes to things. I think somebody posted in the chat around, the reluctance for some people to buy secondhand clothes, for example. And I think this is changing, actually, and you do see different attitudes for different generations. So just as an example, there's now a popular platform called Back Market now, which you may be aware of, where you can buy secondhand electrical devices that are sort of guaranteed, and there's a formal structure around that. eBay is pushing quite heavily, if you've got recently, secondhand clothes and secondhand items. So I think there is a sort of a bit of a move towards this. And some of the things we can do as London boroughs don't necessarily need to cost a fortune if we act together. I mean, one of the current campaigns, if you haven't signed up already, London are working with our programme to put together a food campaign for next year and to run for the next 2 years, which will focus very much on cultures around food waste, on diet, and they're tricky issues. These are deeply embedded cultural things sometimes, but I think what we can do is get the science out there, the facts, and and the options to people. And if we can use all of our 30 plus comms teams to push those same messages, it will hopefully get a lot more traction. So I think we can club together on this, and that's probably the real benefit of this collaboration through these programs. We're singing from the same song sheet.
Thanks, Matthew. And I know, I'm not sure if Re London are represented on the call, but they've done a lot of work around communications and obviously working closely with Matthew, but also thinking about how we define the circular economy and bring more definitions into circular economy and growth away from just those conversations that have involved those directly kind of involved in waste and recycling jobs and businesses. And I think it was an exciting report in Circular Economy Week a couple of weeks ago. Caton has put in the chat around retrofit and non-domestic buildings. I know there's been a really strong strand with the GLA and the retrofit programme around involving business and thinking about non-domestic buildings as well. So I don't know if James or someone else is able to come in on that point. And I was going to mention, Syed, and the conference around community energy that took place yesterday that I was sadly unable to attend, but there is obviously that crucial role around community energy and whether Ashwin wants to come back in on that topic. And Katerina, you might but still quite challenging situation around local net zero forum. So can I do them in that order? Back to retrofit, James, and then Ashwin, and then Katerina.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's a certainly good point, and we are intending to come back and try and tackle the challenge of retrofitting non-domestic buildings at a later stage. I suppose a lot of the technology equally applies to domestic and non-domestic buildings. I suspect it's just a little bit harder at present because a lot of the policy and the financial mechanisms and arguably some of the means of kind of resident engagement differ quite significantly between the domestic and the non-domestic sphere. But it's certainly something we're keen to approach over the coming year or two. And as you noted, the GLA are quite active in this area. So they've got a retrofit accelerator program all around non-domestic buildings, particularly those owned by local authorities. So it is something that we're consciously thinking about, but we need to create the kind of space and time and capacity to really kind of strategize about it a bit more.
Thanks. And I know that we've engaged with the kind of great estates, haven't we, as well, and commercial landlords, and I think the city's doing a piece of work around that as well. So perhaps we just need to be able to share that information via the usual channels or future event. Ashwin, on community energy, and thanks for the kind plug again, Syed, in the chat.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, so just to go back onto the non-domestic building side, the decentralized energy work stream is looking at renewable energy generation within those non-domestic buildings as well. Obviously, there's broader measures within retrofit on non-domestic buildings, but that is a small part of our program too. And on the community energy point, I think that we know and we recognise that it's going to be challenging to meet all of the borough's renewable energy requirements within London due to planning restrictions and space and that sort of thing, and that's going to be a key challenge. So getting in those renewable energy generation outside of London, but ideally having that as close to London as possible is ideally the best situation, so that we're kind of reducing the transmission from those places. And we know that community energy is a key part of that and has a real opportunity to add additional social value to some of these projects. And we'll be really keen to work with you, Saeed, on looking at how we can do that for community energy projects, not those ones at the smaller scale that are kind of working within London, but also those larger community energy projects that might be coming on board outside of London, such as large solar arrays.
Thanks, Ashwin. That was really, really good and really useful. Katerina, on our relationship with government.
Yes, thank you. And if I just come in, so we've had a greener and warmer homes and buildings summit earlier in February, and actually a lot of the business membership organizations like London First, the CBI and so forth have attended that meeting with us and are now actually taking some separate work streams forward as well, which we are involved in. So just to add to that too. So it is not being overlooked is what I wanted to say, and we are very conscious of this. And in terms of our relationship with government, and yes, we are part of the Net Zero Forum, so we are sending a representative of London councils, and the Net Zero Forum does seem to be made up of representatives of a lot of membership organisations. So it did have its first meeting, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's fair to say we need to embed how this is going to work and how, you know, the feedback mechanisms is going to work, because at the moment they want to reach a way in which we can be quite open and honest about how we're feeding back to government, which I think is welcomed. But then that also means, you know, how can we then feed back to everybody who's involved and who needs to know what's going on in this. So there's a bit of things to be worked through, I think, but generally very welcome the initiative. I think it's a good one, and it's certainly bringing together a number of different government departments to this Net Zero Forum, which is not a given, and it is quite hard to achieve. So I think there's definitely a good first step, but true to say, we need to work on how this is best used and useful to the local government sector. But this is not the only way we're engaging with government, you know, where we're talking to government on most of our schemes, actually, and also particularly around the finance thing. So they're very involved and engaged and interested in the Climate Investment Commission work that I mentioned earlier. So we are using every opportunity to engage with government, and will lobby as you know, once the lobbying starts in earnest again later in the year on all sorts of things like this spending review and budget and so forth.
Thanks, Katharina. Really good summing up of where we're at, and I referenced the report yesterday and our response to it as well, in linking back to the COP26 commitment around role of local government and places. I've got Prue in the chat has referenced the opportunities to link up with Lottie as the co-political lead of Lottie. Really pleased with that. We did some amazing sprint work over a couple of weeks around bringing together some of the key practitioners, breaking down actually some of the themes and looking at the opportunities to work together in different ways to solve them. And I made the point at the launch of the Digital Inclusion Service last Friday that actually the reuse of our electronic equipment and the role that can play in circular economy and reducing digital exclusion, but also how it helps with our climate and one world living impacts. Carol's made a powerful point about land use and the role that can play in transport and best use. I think there's something there for Natalie in the London plan around how car parks are treated in the London plan, especially around regeneration. And then I might go back to Sarah if she's got some thoughts about the linking between sort of planning and low carbon transport. Natalie.
Thanks, Meg Glanville. Yeah, absolutely. I think the wider point here is that I think I'm right in saying that all London boroughs work proactively with developers and landowners to maximise opportunities on site and look to deliver on all of these objectives around climate change. So I think, yeah, there's a number of tools available to us as planners. We can look to develop site allocations and planning guidance, but also very powerful to start early discussions with stakeholders through the pre-application process. So, you know, that's I know from experience that that's going on across London on sites that are currently underutilised. And yeah, I think that this is covered by the London plan. We have, you know, it's quite clear that you know, particularly in areas where there's which covers most of London actually, which are highly accessible by public transport, which should be looking to reduce and, if possible, eliminate car parking within sites as part of the regeneration. So I think that is, I think we're in a good place, and I think that is we have a good framework already, and work is already underway looking at key sites. So yeah, I think we're in a good place with that one.
Thanks, Natalie. Sarah.
Yep, absolutely. Planning is exceptionally important in low carbon transport, and 15-minute cities and anything like that won't be achieved without total focus on that. But we are unpicking more than 30 years of planning policy and the difficulties of that. And I don't think, and maybe other London boroughs or colleagues have different experiences, but issues around parking, car parking and cars are some of the most polarising in our community with people, and we need to be really clear about aspiration, but also about what that means locally and politically to people. But absolutely, we want to work very closely with planning colleagues. And I think it's probably an area that local government, due to many things around austerity, is not a great deal of skills in transportation planning that we had before. I think some of those things have changed. So it's a real area I think we need to focus on, and spatial planning strategies around parking are going to be absolutely crucial to work across. And that's why it's got to be together and across London boroughs and the local government family.
Thanks, Sarah. We've also just got a few kind of questions back around the skills piece and One World Living, I think, and the Build Green Economy strand with sort of Keith's challenge. I know we're doing, as I said, a lot of work with the GLA on green skills. I think the Skills Academy quality mark yesterday that was announced had quite a few of London's skills providers and a real green strand within that. I can't chair the meeting and put it in the chat, the release we had from the GLA yesterday, but I just wonder if Wayne wanted to come in on the green economy and what we mean about that kind of green growth and skills piece.
Yes, of course, Councillor. Sorry, Mayor Glanville. So I think picking up on the conversation earlier as well, it's absolutely critical that this really sort of feeds into the education and skills processes, and we have an opportunity right now to sort of start influencing individuals who want to go into the green skills sort of sector, and we can utilize sort of careers advisors and others. The GLA's Academies program is absolutely critical in that, as is sort of each London borough has its own sort of skills team, and it's really important that link into the boroughs, into the local communities, where so that we identify the individuals who can most benefit from any sort of work around skills. And we're thinking about those skills in sort of that macro level, I think, in terms of careers for the future, as well as those sort of softer sort of skills that we can all sort of pick up around sort of our consumer choices and the like. In terms of how that supports the green economy, it's absolutely critical. I think what we're finding, there's a danger if you move too soon, that you could train individuals, but the jobs won't necessarily be there in the green sectors. So it's really important that we sort of work on both of those things very closely together, but really focus our efforts into increasing the demand. And I touched on in the presentation the importance of sort of councils taking a leadership role in that, and some of our colleagues highlighted that as well, in terms of steering our own spend towards green initiatives, having sort of green procurement policies in place. And there's a very useful sort of guidance document that's coming out from our West London colleagues around sort of what green procurement looks like for local authorities. And I think with that, there's a chance to sort of stimulate that green growth, but also stimulate then the real job opportunities for our communities to take advantage of sort of straight away, I think, and as soon as we can on this process. But it's very much something that we're going to have to track that progress of the two and make sure they match. Otherwise, there's a real danger that we'll lose our public in this if they sort of make the effort to learn, retrain, but the options and the choices aren't there for them to take advantage of. And that's absolutely a critical focus for us at the moment, because we see that as a real sort of opportunity to stimulate the green economy in London.
Thanks, Wayne. A really powerful place to end our discussions after the presentations. We're down to finish at 12, and I have the unenviable job of summing us up and closing the meeting. I just wanted to thank everyone that came. We had over 100 involved at our peak. This wouldn't have been possible, though, without London Council's officers coordinating the event. And as I said, everyone's been busy at the in Climate Action Week, and I thank people for coming. I hope across the 7 powerful presentations, people see not just the work that we're doing, but some real heroes of the public sector and London's local government, and that this is a collaborative and permeable agenda. So everyone has been putting either on their slides or in the chat contact details. People really do want to see colleagues involved and draw in London civic society, but also if people are working on frontline and other local authorities, I think do just send people an email and say, you know, I want to get involved. I think none of it has been possible, though, without that help and support from colleagues and the challenge from civic society, I hope that people also see. And just to rest assured that when we do come together in things like the expert advisory group, but also in these groups, you know, academia is there, business is there, trade unions are there, civic society is there, as well as the GLA and those sort of more statutory partners. I'm really inspired, as I always am, dipping into and having the privilege to chair events like this. I hope that we can repeat some of the more detailed workshops that we did in the Borough Conference. And I think Katerina put some of a deep dive event happening only next month into green finance. So please stay in touch, stay engaged. People are putting their contact details in the chat, and we promised to share slides as well as those. I think it was from the One World Living have got some new reports that they want to share as well. Thank you so much for coming. Look forward to seeing you again, and I really do believe that we have some of the best leadership on this agenda in London, but we also recognise that we have to work with that wider core cities, key cities, the South East and the LGA as well on this agenda. So thanks very much indeed.